"That," said the dowager at Cordelia's elbow, nodding across the crowded ballroom, "is Mr. Harton, who came into Harton Hall as a young man and has made such a great deal of it. Herefordshire born. You would not know him, I dare say, before your time." Cordelia Reed went very still. She did not turn her head. She had learned a long time ago that turning the head was how you were caught. She kept her eyes on the dancers, and her breath even, and her gloved hands folded in her lap. She said, in a voice she was proud of, that no, she did not know the gentleman. The dowager talked on, pleased to have someone to talk at, and Cordelia heard none of it. Because she did know the gentleman. She knew him better than she knew almost anyone left alive. The man across the ballroom, greying now, stouter than she remembered, laughing over a glass of wine, was her father's younger brother. He had come into Harton Hall the way a tide comes into a room, with a hole knocked in the sea wall. And the reason he could stand in a lit ballroom not 40 feet from his brother's only child, and never once look her way, was very simple. He believed his brother's only child was dead. It had very nearly been true. She made herself count. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. It was an old trick, from the years when counting was the only thing that had kept her upright, and it steadied her now. She was Miss Reed. She was a companion, paid a companion's wage, dressed in a companion's grey. There was nothing about the quiet young woman by the wall to connect her with a little girl of 10, who had been sent away from a great house in a closed carriage one wet October morning, 16 years gone, and told never to speak her own name again. Nothing except the man across the room. And the fact that she had, for one reckless hour that evening, allowed herself to be seen. That was the part she would repent of later. She repented of it already. It had begun with the Duke. She had not known he was a duke at first. That was the truth of it, and she held to the truth even when it did her no good, because the truth was the one possession her uncle had not managed to take. She had been standing where companions stand, at the edge of things, holding her employer's fan and her employer's opinions, when a man had come and stood beside her. Not to be seen standing there. Men who wished to be seen did not stand at the edge with the companions. He had simply come to the quiet part of the room, as though he too found the middle of it unbearable. He had looked at the dancers with an expression of such controlled distaste that Cordelia, before she could stop herself, had said aloud that he appeared to be enjoying the evening a very great deal. He had turned and looked at her. He had tired hazel eyes and dark hair going grey at the temples before its time, and a face that had learned to give away nothing. And for a moment she thought she had ruined herself with her own tongue, as she had been warned 100 times she would. Then something had moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, the near side of one. "I am enjoying it," he had said, "as much as a man can enjoy being counted." "Counted, sir?" Counted, weighed, totted up like a column in a ledger, and found to come to a satisfactory sum. He had glanced at the mothers steering their daughters, at the whole soft machinery of the room, and back to her. "You are not counting me. I noticed it from across the room. It is a very restful thing to be near." "I have no head for figures," Cordelia had said, "and no reason to do sums on a stranger." And he had laughed. It was a short, surprised, rusty sound, as though it did not come out often, and 2 women nearby had turned to stare at it, and the man had looked as startled as they were. They talked for the better part of an hour, and she could not afterward have said of what, though she remembered every word for years. It had the quality certain conversations have, once or twice in a life, of feeling less like the meeting of strangers than like the resumption of something begun long before. He asked her first what she was reading, for there was a book half hidden under her employer's shawl on the bench. When she told him, he raised one brow and said it was heavy fare for a ballroom. She said that a ballroom was exactly where one needed heavy fare, to have something to hold on to, and he almost smiled again. "You dislike dancing," he said. "I dislike being looked at while I do it. That is a different complaint. The dancing itself I could bear." "Then why not dance?" "Because a woman in my position who dances is looked at twice as hard and asked twice as many questions, and I have not the answers to spare." She said it lightly, and regretted it, for it came too near the truth. She saw him mark it, the way he seemed to mark everything, filing it away behind the tired hazel eyes, without comment. He did not ask the questions she had warned him off. That was the thing she remembered longest. Another man would have pressed, gently, kindly, or he did not press. He changed the subject entirely, to the book, and then to books, and then to a dozen other things. And he let her be a woman with opinions, instead of a mystery with a past. It was a gift so unlooked for that she found herself giving him, in return, the only thing she had to give, which was honesty about all the things that were safe to be honest about. They discovered that they disagreed about very nearly everything, and enjoyed it enormously. He thought the country dull, and she thought it the last honest place left in England. He thought town a necessary evil, and she thought it a crowd got up to avoid the terror of one's own company. He told her she argued like a woman who had won a great many arguments alone in her own head, with no one to answer back. She told him that was exactly how she had learned to argue, and that he need not look so pleased with himself for having noticed. And he laughed. The second time, the rusty, surprised sound came easier, and he did not look startled by his own laughing, and Cordelia thought, with a small private alarm, that she was enjoying herself. She had not enjoyed herself in a room full of people in longer than she could reckon. "Dance with me," he said. "I will stand between you and the looking. It is the one thing a man of my rank is truly good for. No one dares stare at what I have chosen to stand beside." That is an argument for dancing with a duke I had not considered. It is the only argument for it. Everything else about us is a trial, I assure you. So she danced with him. He did stand between her and the looking, somehow, by the plain fact of who he was, and for the length of the dance she was, absurdly, at ease. When it ended, he did not release her to the wall at once, but asked, with a directness that was almost rudeness, and that she found she preferred to any amount of polish, whether she would give him a second. A companion did not dance with a gentleman at all, as a rule, and certainly not twice with the same one, and Cordelia knew, even as she gave him her hand again, that she was doing a foolish and dangerous thing. She did it anyway. She had wanted, just once, just for an hour, to be a woman in a ballroom, and not a secret in a grey gown. It was the wanting that undid her. She would remember that, too, later, that the whole disaster had begun not with a duke, but with a want. She learned he was the Duke of Chasewood only afterward, from the dowager, from the same idle-carrying voice that now, a quarter of an hour later, had shown her uncle across the room, and taken the whole evening down like a house of cards. Because if her uncle was here, then she was not safe. It was as simple and as total as that. For 16 years her safety had rested on one thing only, on being no one, on being nowhere, on being a girl who had died in a closed carriage on a wet road. And she had spent this one evening being seen, being spoken of, being danced with, twice, by a duke, in a room that contained the one man in England who most needed her to stay dead. She rose. She murmured something to the dowager about the heat. She did not hurry, because hurrying was how you were caught, and she made her slow, careful way along the wall toward the door, and she had almost reached it when the Duke of Chasewood stepped into her path. "You are leaving?" he said. "I am unwell, Your Grace. A headache. The rooms are close." He looked at her. He had a way of looking that took in a great deal, and she saw him take in the whiteness of her face, and the thing behind it, and she saw him choose not to name it, which was its own kind of courtesy. "Let me take you to your carriage," he said. "I have no carriage. I came with my employer. Please." Her composure was going. She could feel it going, like sand through the fingers. "Please, Your Grace. I must go, and I must go alone, and I must ask you, though I have no right to ask you anything, not to follow me, and not to inquire after me. I know how strange that sounds. I cannot explain it. I would give a great deal to be the kind of woman who could explain it. I am not. Let me go." For a moment he did not move, and she thought he would refuse, and she did not know what she would do if he refused. Then he stepped aside. "Miss Reed," he said, low, as she passed him. "Whatever it is, if you are in trouble, there are men in the world who can be trusted." "I'm sure there are," said Cordelia. "I have never had the fortune to depend on one." And she went out through the hall into the cold, and did not stop until the dark, and the street had swallowed her. And it was only much later, in the narrow bed of her narrow room, that she discovered she had come away with one glove. The other she had lost somewhere in her flight. She could not think where. It did not seem to matter. It was only a glove. It was not only a glove. To understand what the glove was, you would have to understand what Cordelia had lost, and to understand that, you would have to go back 16 years, to Harton Hall, when the girl who was now called Reed had another name, and a father, and a home. Her father had been Sir Edmund Harton, and Harton Hall had grown out of the Herefordshire land the way the great old houses do, as though the hills had decided to make themselves a shape, and had chosen stone. Cordelia had been born there, and had expected, in the unthinking way of a loved child, to live there always. She had a pony, and a nurse named Dorcas, who loved her past all reason, and a father who called her his heiress, and meant it. There were no sons. Sir Edmund had made no secret of his intention that the hall and the land and the name should come to his daughter, sons or no sons. He had written it down plainly, and witnessed, and locked it in the strong box in his study. Her father died when she was 10. A fall from a horse, on a grey autumn afternoon, in a field she could still see if she shut her eyes. And within a month, the whole world had turned over. Her uncle Horatio came. He had always been the poor brother, the younger son, the one who had gone out to make his way, and had not made much of it. He came to Harton Hall in his mourning black, with his soft voice and his sad face. He took Cordelia's small, cold hand in his, and told her he would take care of everything. He took care of everything. That was exactly what he did. There was no will, he said, when the lawyers came. He was very sorry. He had searched, and there was no will, and in the absence of a will, the estate passed, as such estates did, to the nearest male heir, which was himself. As for the child, the poor child, he would of course see her provided for. There was a difficulty, he said, lowering his voice, that made her position delicate. A question about the marriage. About whether Sir Edmund's marriage to Cordelia's mother, who had died bearing her, had been quite regular. He did not like to speak of it. He spoke of it a great deal, in the right ears, gently, sorrowfully, until the thing was half believed. A doubtful marriage, a doubtful child. Better for everyone, was it not, if the child were sent quietly away to distant people under a plain name, where the doubt could do her no harm? Cordelia had been 10. She had understood almost none of it. She had understood only that the strong box in her father's study, which she had watched him lock 100 times, was empty when the lawyers opened it, and that her uncle had been alone in that study for 3 days before they came. She was sent away in a closed carriage on a wet October morning, with Dorcas, who refused to be parted from her, to a cold, distant cousin who took the small allowance Horatio paid for the child's keep, and gave the child as little as the allowance would stretch to. She was told she was to be called Miss Reed now. She was told that Harton was a closed door, that to speak the name was to invite ruin, that a girl of doubtful birth and no fortune had one thing only to trade upon in the world, her good quiet name, and that she had better keep it plain and keep it low. She was 10. She believed what she was told, because children do. By the time she was old enough to doubt it, she had learned that doubting changed nothing. She had no proof, no money, no protector, and no name. The man who had taken all 4 was a respected gentleman of Herefordshire, and she was a companion in a grey gown. But she remembered the strong box, and Dorcas remembered more, for Dorcas had been in the house those 3 days, and Dorcas had seen Horatio at the study fire, late, with papers in his hand, and had seen what colour the flames burned. And Dorcas, who could not read, had nonetheless kept a single sheet of paper all these years, sewn into the lining of an old work bag she would not be parted from. She had taken it from Sir Edmund's own hand in his last week of life, when he had grown afraid, without quite knowing why. "Keep this safe," he had said to her. "Keep it for the child. Do not give it to my brother, whatever he tells you." Dorcas had kept it. She could not read it. She did not know what it was. She only knew that her master had put it in her hand and told her to keep it for the child, and Dorcas had kept faith with the dead for 16 years, sewn into a work bag, waiting for a day she was no longer sure would come. That was what the glove was. Not the paper, but the same kind of thing. The glove was her mother's. It was the one fine thing Cordelia owned, kid leather grown soft with age, and at the wrist, in silk gone the colour of old ivory, was worked a small device that Cordelia had traced with her finger 10,000 times in the dark. A heart for Harton, the family badge. Her mother had worn these gloves at her wedding. They were the single thing Cordelia had carried out of her old life in the closed carriage, hidden in her shift, too small a thing for anyone to trouble to take. She had worn them exactly once in 16 years. She had worn them to the ball, because for one evening she had wanted to carry something of her true self into the light, and she had left one of them behind her on the floor of a ballroom, at the feet of a duke, in her flight. She did not sleep the night after the ball. She lay in the dark and told herself it did not matter. The glove, that a lost glove could tell no one anything. That in the morning she would be Miss Reed again, and the evening would close over like water. She almost believed it. She had not reckoned on the Duke of Chasewood. He had picked up the glove himself. He had seen it fall. Or rather, he had seen, after she was gone, the small pale shape of it on the floor where she had stood, and had crossed to it and taken it up before a footman could. And he had stood there in the middle of his own certainty, holding a stranger's glove and feeling like a fool. He was a man of 35. He had been hunted for his title since he was 22, and had grown a hard shell against the hunting, and he did not chase women who fled from him. He told himself all of this quite clearly. Then he put the glove in his pocket, and went home, and took it out again. It was a good glove. That was the first thing that troubled him. A companion in grey did not own gloves like this, soft old costly kid. He turned it in his hands, and found the little worked device at the wrist, the running heart. He did not know what it was, but he knew it was a badge, a family badge, the kind of thing embroidered on the linen of houses that have linen worth embroidering. A poor companion carrying a gentlewoman's crested glove. It made no sense. It was the first thread, and he was a man who, once he had hold of a thread, could not for the life of him leave it alone. He would tell himself, in the year that followed, a great many sensible reasons for what he did. He was bored. He was curious. A man liked a puzzle. He did not tell himself the true reason, which was that for 1 hour, at the edge of a crowded room, a woman had looked at him, and seen a man, and not a fortune, and had then walked out into the dark, asking nothing of him but to be let go. In 35 years of being wanted for the wrong thing. It was the first time he could remember being wanted, if he had been wanted at all, for the right one. He did not tell himself that. But he kept the glove in the drawer of his writing desk, and he began quietly to look. He was not a fool about it. He did not advertise or make himself ridiculous, or set a runner to chase a housemaid. He asked carefully, in the right quarters, after a Miss Reed companion lately in town. There were, it turned out, a great many Miss Reeds. Reed was a common name. That, too, when he thought of it, was strange, that a woman carrying a crest should go by so plain and common a name, and it deepened the puzzle rather than solving it, and the deeper the puzzle went, the less he could leave it. The season ended. Society went to the country, and the Duke of Chasewood, to the despair of every matchmaking mother who had marked him down as the great prize of the year, went nowhere and courted no one. He kept a woman's glove in his desk drawer, and took it out sometimes, and looked at the little running heart, and wondered where she was. She was in a small town in the west, being Miss Reed. Her employer had gone home to the country, and Cordelia, with her, to a quiet, genteel household, in a quiet, genteel place, where nothing happened, and no dukes came. And she was glad of it, or told herself she was. The near miss at the ball had frightened her more than she let herself feel at the time. She had grown careless, she thought. 16 years of safety had made her forget that safety was a thing you kept by never once forgetting it, and she resolved to forget it no more, to be misread so thoroughly that even she believed it. It did not answer. Something had come loose in her at the ball, and it would not go back. She had spent 16 years not wanting things, folding the wants away as they came. One evening of being seen had unfolded the whole drawer of them. Now she lay awake, wanting, which she had not done in years. And the worst of the wanting was not the Duke, though the Duke was in it. The worst of it was Harton Hall, the hills, the name, the empty strong box, the thing that had been done to her father's plain intention and her mother's memory, and a 10-year-old girl in a closed carriage. For 16 years she had told herself there was nothing to be done. And for the first time, lying awake in a strange, small town, she let herself frame the traitorous question. Was there nothing to be done? Or had she only never dared? We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. There was a child in the town who took to following Cordelia about. A small girl, 5 or 6, the daughter of the woman who kept the chandler's shop, with a squint and a shyness that kept the other children off her. Cordelia, who knew what it was to be the child no one played with, made a point of speaking to her and of listening when she spoke. It took patience, for the child spoke slowly and stammered. She brought the girl a ribbon once. It was a small thing. The child wore it every day until it fell to pieces, and looked for Cordelia in the street the way you look for the one safe face. And Cordelia, who had thought herself past being needed by anyone, found that being looked for like that undid something in her, and did her, in some way she could not explain, a great deal of good. She thought, watching the child, that a person could be made small by the world and still not be made unkind by it, if she chose, and that the choosing was perhaps the only real freedom the powerless were left. She did not know it, but she was making, in those quiet weeks, the decision that would change everything. She was deciding that she was tired of being made small. The town did not know what it had. That was the strangeness Cordelia lived inside every day. She went to the market with her employer's basket and haggled over the price of fish, and the fishwife called her Miss Reed and thought her a poor genteel drudge, and no one in the whole busy street knew that the woman turning over the mackerel was the rightful mistress of a Herefordshire estate. She had grown used to the double vision of it. She saw herself as the town saw her, plain and poor, and past her first youth, and she saw herself as she truly was. She had learned to hold both pictures at once without going mad, which is a skill, and a lonely one. And no one had ever thanked her for it, because no one had ever known she was doing it. It was the loneliness of the secret that wore hardest. A grief shared is halved, the saying goes, and it is true. But a grief that cannot be spoken at all is not halved. It is doubled. It grows in the dark of the unspeaking, like a thing in a cellar. For 16 years, Cordelia had carried the whole of her history alone, unable to say to a single soul, "This is who I am. This is what was done to me," because to say it was to endanger herself. So she had said it to no one, and it had sat in her chest all that time, getting heavier. She had not known how heavy until the evening by the fire, when Dorcas showed her. The paper, and something held for 16 years, began, at last, to be set down. And once a thing like that begins to be set down, it cannot be picked back up. That was what Cordelia was learning in the quiet weeks. She could not unknow that the proof existed. She could not go back to being the Miss Reed who bore it all, because there was nothing to be done, now that there was, plainly, something to be done, and only her own fear standing between her and the doing of it. The fear was still there. It was an old companion, but it had stopped being a wall and become only a fear, which is a different thing, a thing a person can walk through if she decides to. And Cordelia was deciding to. And Dorcas was dying. Not quickly. But the old woman was past 70 now, and the winter had got into her chest. She sat by the fire in the little room she shared with Cordelia, and coughed and grew thinner. And one evening she took Cordelia's hand in her own dry one, and said the thing she had never said in 16 years. "There is a paper," said Dorcas. "Child, I have never told you. Your father gave it me, in his own hand that last week. Keep it for the child, he says, and do not give it my brother whatever he tells you. I could not read it. I have kept it. It is here." And she showed her the old work bag she would never be parted from, and the seam in the lining that had been opened and sewn 100 times, and inside, folded small and gone soft as cloth, a single sheet of paper, in a hand that stopped Cordelia's heart. It was her father's hand. She had not seen it in 16 years. It was the will, not the strong-box will that Horatio had burned. A second copy, made in her father's last frightened week, in his own hand, and witnessed by the Herefordshire parson and the parson's wife, leaving Harton Hall and the whole of the Harton estate, plainly, wholly, without any doubt or condition whatsoever, to his daughter Cordelia. And a line beneath it, in the same hand, that Cordelia read 3 times before she could see it for the tears, affirming before God that his marriage had been regular, and his daughter legitimate, and that any man who said otherwise was a liar and would answer for it. He had known. In his last week, without knowing how or why, her father had smelled the thing coming. He had made a second will, and given it to the one soul in the house he trusted, an unlettered nurse who loved his child. He had told her to keep it from his brother, and she had, for 16 years, sewn into a bag, waiting. Cordelia sat on the floor by the fire with the paper in her hands, and wept as she had not wept since she was 10 years old. And when she had done weeping, she was, for the first time in 16 years, not afraid. She was angry, and anger, she found, was a great deal more useful than fear. "Dorcas," she said, "we are going to need a lawyer, and I am afraid, before it is over, we are going to need to speak my name out loud." The trouble was that a will is only a piece of paper until a court believes it, and to make a court believe it, she would need more than the paper. She would need the parson who had witnessed it if he lived. She would need to prove that she was who she said she was, that Miss Reed was Cordelia Harton, that the child who died in the closed carriage had not died at all. And she would need to do all of this against a respected gentleman in comfortable possession of a great estate, a man with money and standing and 16 years of a settled story on his side. And she had a dying witness who could not read, a soft old sheet of paper, and a plain grey name. She had no illusions about the size of it. But she had stopped, somewhere by the fire, believing that the size of a wrong was a reason to leave it standing. It was the glove, in the end, that brought the Duke back into it. He had gone on looking, all that autumn and winter, in his quiet, stubborn way. He set no runners loose to make a spectacle of it. He asked instead, in drawing rooms idly, whether anyone recalled a Miss Reed, a companion, at the ball. A few did. None knew her. She had come with a colonel's widow, who had since gone into the country, and no one had marked the companion, because no one ever marked the companion. That, he was beginning to understand, was the whole architecture of her life. She had built herself out of the world's habit of not looking. It was a very good disguise. It was nearly a perfect one. Hunting the small blank space where she ought to have been, he found that he admired the workmanship even as he cursed it. He grew short with his friends, who noticed. One of them, a plain man he had known since school, took him aside at his club and told him he was making himself talked about, mooning after a vanished companion like a boy of 19. Had he considered that the woman had fled him quite deliberately, and might wish to be let alone? The Duke had considered it. He considered it every day. It was the one argument against himself he could not answer, and it was precisely because he could not answer it that he did not stop. A man behaving reasonably can always be talked out of a thing. A man who knows he is not can only go on. By midwinter, he had run every thread to its frayed end, and he sat with the glove on his desk and admitted that he had failed. He had not the smallest notion where she was. He might never see her again. He might have got nowhere forever, and let her go, and married some suitable stranger in the end out of sheer weariness, had he not one grey afternoon left the glove lying on his desk when his great-aunt Ursula came to call. Lady Ursula was 81 years old, and afraid of nothing on the earth or under it. She had known the Duke since he was an hour old, considered him the only member of the family worth the powder to blow him up, and made a habit of arriving unannounced to tell him so. She came into his study and sat down without being asked, and while he rang for tea, her sharp old eyes went round the room the way they always did, missing nothing, and stopped on the glove. She picked it up. She turned it over. She looked for a long moment at the small, worked heart at the wrist, and the colour went out of her old face, and she said, in a voice quite unlike her usual voice, "Where did you get this?" "It is a long story, Aunt. A woman I met once. She left it." "Why? Do you know the badge?" "Know it." Lady Ursula sat with the glove in her two hands, as though it were a living thing. "I danced at the wedding, where the bride wore these very gloves, or their fellows. Augustus, this is the Harton heart. The Hartons of Harton Hall, in Herefordshire. I knew Edmund Harton when we were both young. A good man. He married for love, a portionless girl, very beautiful, and she died giving him a daughter. And then Edmund himself died, young, thrown from a horse, and there was the most dreadful business over the estate. Her mouth thinned. The brother took it. Horatio. There was a will, everyone said, that left it to the little girl, and the will was never found, and Horatio put it about that the marriage had been irregular and the child no true heir, and the child was sent away and died, poor mite, somewhere, of something, as poor sent-away children do. And Horatio Harton has sat in Edmund's chair at Edmund's table these 16 years, and no one has ever proved a thing against him. She looked up, and her eyes were terrible. Augustus, where is the woman who wore this glove? The Duke of Chasewood had gone very quiet. He was thinking of a white face at a ballroom door, and a low voice saying, "Please," and I have never had the fortune to depend on one, and the whole shape of the puzzle was turning over in his mind, and coming down, at last, the right way up. "That," he said slowly, "is what I have spent the better part of a year trying to discover." "Then discover it faster," said Lady Ursula. "For if that child is not dead, if she is somewhere in the world carrying her mother's glove, then there is a wrong 16 years old wanting a right, and I am 81, and I should very much like to see one before I go." It took him 5 more weeks, but he had the name now, the true name, the thread run back to its root, and a man with a name and a fortune and a very great motive can do in 5 weeks what a man with a glove and a puzzle cannot do in a year. He set his man of business to it. He traced the closed carriage back through 16 years, from cold cousin to cold cousin, to a small town in the west, to a genteel household, to a companion in grey who called herself Reed. And on a bright, cold morning, very like the one on which this story began, the Duke of Chasewood got down from a travel-stained carriage in a small western town. He knocked at a modest door, and he asked, with his heart going in a way he had long believed it had forgotten how, whether he might speak with Miss Reed. She came into the little parlour and saw him and stopped in the doorway, one hand on the frame. For a moment neither of them said anything at all. "You asked me not to follow you," he said at last, "and not to inquire after you. I have done both. I will not insult you by pretending otherwise, or by pretending I am sorry because I am not. I have looked for you for the better part of a year." He took the glove from his breast pocket, where it seemed he had taken to carrying it, and held it out to her across the little room. "You left this. I have wanted, all this while, to return it to the hand it belongs to." Cordelia looked at the glove. She looked at the man. She thought of 100 careful things she might say, and discarded them all, and said the only true one. "You know," she said, "or you have guessed, or you would not be here. I know that the badge on that glove is the Harton heart," said the Duke, "and that Sir Edmund Harton had a daughter who was sent away and is supposed to have died, and that you are carrying her mother's glove and calling yourself by a name that is not yours. I do not know the rest. I should like to. But I did not come to demand it of you. I came to tell you that you asked me once whether you had ever had the fortune to depend on a man, and said you had not. And I have thought about that sentence for a year, and I came to see whether I might be the one to alter it. That is all. You may tell me to go again, and I will go again, but I had rather you did not." And Cordelia Harton, who had trusted no one but a dying nurse for 16 years, stood in a shabby parlour and made the third and hardest of her decisions, which was to stop at last being alone. "Sit down, Your Grace," she said. "It is a long story, and a bad one, and I have never told it to a living soul who did not already know it. You had better hear the whole." She told him. All of it. The strong box, and the burned will, and the closed carriage, and the plain name, Dorcas, and the paper sewn in the work-bag, and her father's hand affirming his marriage, and his daughter before God. She told it plainly, without weeping, because she had done her weeping. He listened without once interrupting, which she had not expected of a duke. When she had finished, he sat a while in silence, and then he said something that told her more about him than an hour of protestation could have done. "You mean to fight it yourself?" he said. "You have already decided. You did not decide it when I walked in. You decided it weeks ago by that fire, with that paper in your hand. You are not asking me to rescue you. You are wondering whether I will get in your way." "Yes," said Cordelia, surprised into honesty. "That is exactly it. Most men would have offered to manage it for me, to take it up as my champion, to do it, and hand me the result. I have spent my life having things done for me and handed to me," said the Duke of Chasewood, "and being managed, and being a prize other people played for, and I would not do to you the thing that has been done to me. This is your wrong. The righting of it is yours. I have lawyers and money, and a name that opens doors, and I put all three at your disposal, entirely, to use exactly as you see fit, and not 1 inch further. But it is your hand on the tiller. I will pull whatever oar you point me at. I will not touch the tiller." He paused. "I have wanted, for a year, to give you back your glove. I find I want rather more to give you back your name. But the glove is yours to take, and the name is yours to win, and I have too much respect for you to do either for you." It was then that Cordelia understood she was in a great deal of trouble, of a different kind entirely from her uncle, and that she had better decide quickly whether she minded. They were much thrown together in the weeks that followed, of necessity, for the fight had begun in earnest, and there was a great deal to do, and in the doing of it she came to know him. He had a house in the county he had taken for the purpose, a plain enough place. There was a library in it, where they sat late over the papers, and there was a long table in the dining room that he had shortened to a comfortable size the first day, without being asked, because, he said, he could not abide shouting at his dinner. She had thought, watching him give the order, that a man's small kindnesses tell you more than his grand ones. She saw him be patient with Dorcas, who was frightened of dukes and said so, and who he sat beside and spoke to gently until she was not. She saw him once with the squinting child from the chandler's shop, whom Cordelia had not been able to leave behind, and had brought along. The child had marched up to the Duke of Chasewood, and asked him, without a stammer, whether he was going to marry Miss Reed. The Duke had gone the colour of his own coat, and said that he was doing his best. The child had nodded, satisfied, and gone away. And Cordelia had been obliged to leave the room. The work itself drew them close in a way no ordinary courtship could have. There is an intimacy in fighting side by side for a thing that matters that the drawing-room knows nothing of. They sat over the papers until the candles guttered. Her uncle's stolen yours spread between them in deeds and dates and depositions, and she learned the quality of his mind, which was patient and exact, and a great deal warmer than he let the world see. He learned hers, which was quicker than his, and would not be hurried past a thing it did not yet understand. They quarrelled, of course. She would not be handled, and he, from long habit of command, handled people without noticing that he did it. The first time he arranged a thing for her comfort without asking, she told him plainly that she had spent 16 years having her life arranged by other people, and would go to the grave sooner than begin again. even by a kind hand, even by his. He had gone very still. Then he had said that she was right, and that he was sorry, and that he would try to remember, and that she must go on telling him when he forgot, because he had been a duke too long, and a duke is a man no one ever tells anything. And she had softened, and said that she would tell him a great deal, that he need not fear going untold, and he had said that he was beginning to count on it. "You are not what I expected," she said to him once, late, both of them tired, the fire low. "No one ever is. You said so yourself at the ball. Everyone is dressed as something they are not. I expected a cold man. You play a cold man very well. I have had a great deal of practice. It is safer being cold. No one asks anything of a cold man, but that he go on being cold." He looked at the fire. "I am out of the habit of being asked things. You ask me things. You look at me as though there were a person in here worth the asking. I had almost stopped believing there was." "There is," said Cordelia. "I have met him. He is difficult and proud, and has appalling opinions about the countryside, and I like him a great deal better than the duke he pretends to be." He looked at her then, across the low fire, and neither of them said anything for a while. It was one of those silences that say more than the talk on either side of it. Cordelia was the one who looked away first, because she was not ready, because she had made herself a promise about the ground she would stand on before she said any such thing aloud, and she meant to keep it. She thought about him more than she should have. She knew the danger of it exactly. She had built her whole survival on wanting nothing, and here she was, wanting, and worse, wanting a duke, which was the oldest and most foolish wanting a woman in a grey gown could fall into. She told herself that sternly, and it made no difference at all. The heart does not take instruction. She had learned that at 10, saying goodbye to a house. And she relearned it now at 26, across a dying fire from a proud, difficult man. He had spent a year looking for her, and had asked her, in all that time, for nothing but the chance to give her back her name. He told her, one night in the library, the thing he had never told anyone. "You asked me," not looking at her, looking at the fire, "why I was standing at the edge of the room. I said something clever about being counted. It was not the whole of it." He turned the glass in his hand. "I was to have married once, years ago. A suitable match. Everyone agreed, and I thought myself fortunate, for she was charming, and I was young enough to mistake being chosen for being wanted. I found out, before the wedding, by accident, in an overheard sentence, that she found me tolerable, and the dukedom irresistible, and that she had said as much, laughing, to a friend, that she would have the title and endure the man. I cried off. There was a scandal. I was thought to have used her badly. I let it stand, because the truth was worse, and I made up my mind at 23 that I would never again make the mistake of believing that a woman who wanted the Duke of Chasewood wanted me. I have kept that resolution for 12 years. It has kept me safe, and it has made me, I am aware, exactly the cold, hard, useless article you took me for across that ballroom. He looked up. And then a woman I had never seen looked at me as though the title were of no more interest to her than the wallpaper, and talked to me for an hour like a human creature, and walked out into the dark asking me for nothing at all except to be let go. Do you understand what that was to me? After 12 years? You are the first person since I was 23 who has wanted nothing from me. It is why I could not stop looking. Not because you fled. Because you wanted nothing. It is the rarest thing I know. Cordelia sat very still. She understood now, the mirror of it. She had spent 16 years hidden behind a false name, wanting to be seen for who she truly was. He had spent 12 behind a true title, wanting the same thing, to be seen behind it. Two people got up in disguises they had not chosen, each starved for the one thing the disguise forbade. "Augustus," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. She saw it land. She had not planned to say it, and having said it, she did not take it back. "When this is finished," she said, "when I am Cordelia Harton in the eyes of the law, and not before, I will tell you a thing I am not willing to say to you now. Now I am a nobody, with a borrowed name, and a borrowed lawyer, and a borrowed cause. And I will not say it from down here. I will say it standing on my own ground, or not at all. You have been very careful of my dignity, Augustus. Let me keep the last of it. Let me win, first. And then ask me again what you came to ask." "I have not asked you anything," said the Duke. "You have been asking me since you walked into that parlor," said Cordelia. "You are the least subtle man I have ever met. It is one of the things I like best about you." And she gathered up the papers and bid him good night, and went up to bed with her heart going in a way that frightened her more than her uncle did, and lay awake, not with fear, for once, but with something she had folded away so long ago she had half forgotten its name. Her uncle, meanwhile, had learned that his brother's daughter was not dead. He learned it the way such men learn things, through a servant paid to carry word, through the ripple that a duke's inquiries make in a quiet county, and it turned Horatio Harton's comfortable world to ice. For 16 years he had lived in the house he had stolen, and had almost forgotten that he had stolen it. He had told the story so long that he half believed it. He had persuaded himself that the marriage really had been doubtful, that the will really had been mislaid, that he had done no more than take up a burden that had fallen naturally to him, that the child was better off, plain and safe, than grand and exposed. Men can persuade themselves of a great deal, given 16 years and a comfortable chair. And now a duke was asking questions in the West, and the child was alive, and had a name, and worse, it was whispered, had a paper, and the whole cardboard edifice of 16 years began to sway. He did not sleep the night he learned it. He sat up in the study that had been his brother's, in the chair that had been his brother's, and he looked at the strong box on the shelf, the empty strong box that he had never been able to bring himself to throw away, as a murderer is said to be unable to leave the place. And he faced, for the first time in a long time, the thing he had spent 16 years not facing. He had not meant to become what he had become. That was what he told the dark. He had been the younger son, the one who was always going to make his way, and never quite did. He had watched his brother inherit the hills, and the house, and the name, and the beautiful portionless wife, and had got, himself, a small allowance and a large envy, and had told himself it did not signify. Then Edmund had died, absurdly, off a horse, on an ordinary afternoon, and there had been the child, a girl, only a girl, and there had been the will in the strong box. And there had been 3 days when Horatio Harton was alone in a great house with a fire and a document, and the whole of his failed life pressing at his back like a crowd. He had told himself the girl would be provided for. He had told himself a doubtful marriage was as good as a true one for keeping a scandal quiet. He had told himself 100 things in 3 days, and on the 3rd day he had put the will in the fire and watched his brother's hand curl and blacken, and he had not felt like a thief. He had felt like a man who had at last been given his due. The feeling had not lasted. Nothing bought that way lasts. He had the hills now, and the house, and the name, and he had discovered the joke at the bottom of it, which was that a stolen life fits no better than a stolen coat. He had gone about for 16 years in a life that was not his, at a table that was not his, sleeping badly in a bed that was not his, waiting, without ever once saying so even to himself, for the knock at the door. And now the knock had come. A duke in the West, a girl who was not dead, a paper he had thought reduced to ash, but had never actually watched the whole of burn. And Horatio Harton, alone in his brother's chair, was for the first time in 16 years almost relieved. He did what frightened men do. He reached first for the softest thing. The softest thing was Dorcas. Word came to him of an old nurse near her end, who had been with the girl these 16 years, and who could not read, and who was the one soul living who could swear to the child's face and to the paper's provenance. And Horatio Harton, who was not by nature a cruel man, only a frightened one, which in the end can do quite as much harm, sent a man of his to the small western town to find the old woman and to persuade her that her memory was faulty, that the paper was a forgery got up by an adventuress, that an old woman near death might do better to hold her tongue than to perjure herself, that there might be a comfortable annuity in the holding of it, and that there might be, for a stubborn old woman who would not be reasonable, a good deal of trouble, for the law was hard on those who swore falsely, and who, after all, would take the word of an unlettered pauper against a gentleman of standing. The man came. He was pleasant. He smiled a great deal. He sat by Dorcas's fire and told her kindly, sorrowfully, what a serious thing it was she was being drawn into. He told her how the young lady she was so fond of would suffer most of all when it came out, as it must, that the whole thing was a fraud. And how much better for everyone, and how much more comfortable for Dorcas's last years, if the old paper were simply given up, and the whole sad business let drop. Dorcas, who was dying and frightened, and who loved Cordelia past all reason, heard him out. And then she said, in her thin old voice, that Sir Edmund had put the paper in her hand with his own, and told her to keep it for the child, and that she had kept it 16 years. She did not much fear the law at 73, she said, with the churchyard already dug. The gentleman might tell whoever had sent him that Dorcas Mercer had kept faith with her master living, and would keep it with him dead, and that he might now take himself out of her room. And the man went, still smiling, and Dorcas sat by the fire and shook, and did not tell Cordelia, because she did not want to frighten her, and that was very nearly a fatal mistake. For the man came again, less pleasant the second time, and it was chance, only chance, that Cordelia came in and found him there, leaning over the old woman's chair, his voice low and no longer kind, and Dorcas white and gasping, and Cordelia crossed that room faster than she had ever crossed a room in her life, and put herself between them. "Get out," she said. "Miss Reed, or should I say Miss Harton? How dramatic." He straightened, unhurried, and looked her over, and smiled the smile she would come to know, the pleasant smile that never reached the eyes, the family smile, for she saw with a lurch that it was her uncle's very own. "You are making a great deal of trouble for yourself, you know. A great deal. A charge of fraud is a hanging matter, in its way, and forgery, and perjury, when this poor old creature is dragged into a court to swear to your fairy tale. Have you thought of her in all this? Have you thought what it will do to her, at her age, to be broken in a witness box by a barrister paid to break her? You have not. You have thought only of your grievance. That is the selfishness of the wronged, Miss Harton. You would burn down a great deal that is standing to right one thing that is bent. My master is a reasonable man. He is prepared to be generous. Take the annuity. Let the old woman die in peace. And go on being Miss Reed, who at least is nobody's prisoner." He put on his hat. "Cordelia Harton, I am afraid, has enemies." Cordelia was shaking. But she had done her being afraid that year, and she found there was a limit to how much of it a person had in them, and she had reached the bottom of hers and struck something harder underneath. "Tell your master," she said, "that I have his brother's will, in his brother's hand, witnessed, affirming my birth and my inheritance before God. Tell him I have a witness who held it from my father's own dying hand. Tell him I have the Duke of Chasewood's lawyers and the Duke of Chasewood's purse, and, which he will find matters more, the Duke of Chasewood's very great personal interest in seeing an old wrong put right. And tell him this from me, from his brother's daughter, whom he called doubtful and sent away in the rain when she was 10 years old and grieving. I remember the strong box. I watched my father lock it 100 times. It was empty when the lawyers came, and my uncle was 3 days alone with it. I was 10. I am not 10 now. Get out of this house, and tell him I am coming for what is mine, and that he had far better have spent these 16 years learning to be poor again than doing what he is about to make me do to him in open court." The man went. He was not smiling. Her uncle came to see her himself once before it went to court. She had not expected it, and she almost refused him. And then she thought that she had waited 16 years to look this man in the face as herself, and would not deny herself the doing of it now. He was shown into the small parlour. He was greyer than at the ball, and stouter, and his fine coat could not hide that he had not slept. He stood in the doorway and looked at his brother's daughter, whom he had last seen as a child of 10 in the rain, and something moved in his face that might, in a better man, have been shame. "You have your mother's look," he said. I did not expect that. I thought I had prepared myself. I had not. "Sit down, uncle," said Cordelia. "You are unwell." He sat. He had come, he said, to be reasonable. He spoke of the annuity again, larger now. He spoke of the ruin a court would make of them both, and of the ugliness of family matters aired in public, and of how her father, whatever else, would not have wished his name dragged through Chancery for the delectation of the mob. He spoke well. He had always spoken well. It was the one thing he had. Cordelia listened to the whole of it, and when he had finished, she asked him one question. "Did you burn it?" He stopped. "The will," she said. "In the study, in the 3 days before the lawyers came. I was 10, and I loved you, because you were my father's brother, and you had a kind, sad voice. And I have wondered every day for 16 years whether I was a fool to love you, or whether you were a good man who did one terrible thing in 3 days of temptation, and has been sorry ever since. I should like to know before we go to court, and it is decided by strangers. I am asking you now, alone, with no one to hear. And I will believe whatever you tell me, because I have wanted all my life to be able to think one kind thing of the last of my father's blood. Did you burn it?" Horatio Harton looked at his brother's daughter, and for a long moment the settled, respectable face hung on by its fingernails. Then it let go, and the frightened man looked out, and he said in a voice gone suddenly old, "God forgive me. Yes." Neither of them spoke for a while. "Thank you," said Cordelia at last, quietly. "That is the only honest thing you have said to me in 16 years, and I find it is worth more to me than the annuity. You may go now, uncle. I will not press for prison. Not because you deserve mercy, for you do not, but because I will not spend my father's memory on revenge, and because I think you have built yourself a prison already, and lived in it a long time, and there is nothing the law could do to you that you have not done more thoroughly to yourself." She rose. "I will have my name back, and my house, but I will not carry your ruin on my conscience on top of everything else you have cost me. Go home and put your affairs in order. It is nearly over." He went, an old, frightened man in a fine coat, and Cordelia stood at the window and watched him go. She did not feel triumph, and she did not feel pity exactly either, but something graver and quieter than both. It was the feeling of a thing at last being told the truth, after 16 years of lies. It came to court in the spring. The Court of Chancery is a slow, cold, cavernous engine, and it does not care for anyone's grievance. Cordelia had been warned by the Duke's grave lawyers that it might take years. That possession was 9 points of the law, that her uncle would fight every inch, that a paper 16 years hidden in a pauper's work bag was exactly the kind of evidence clever men made to look like fraud. She heard all of it. She went forward anyway, and she went forward at every step herself. She sat with the lawyers and understood the papers. She made the decisions. When they wished to spare her the witness box, she refused to be spared. When they wished to keep Dorcas out of it, to protect the old woman, Cordelia said quietly that Dorcas had kept faith for 16 years, and had earned the right to finish it. And she asked Dorcas, who said, fierce and frail, that she would say her master's words in any court in England, and dare them to call her a liar to her face. The hearing filled the great room. Word had got about, as it does, that there was a romance in it, a lost heiress and a searching duke, and the benches were full of the curious. Horatio Harton sat with his counsel, a large, expensive barrister, and he did not look at his niece, and his face was the settled, respectable face of a man who has been wronged by an adventuress, and it was a very good face, and it held for most of a day. They put up their case. That the marriage was doubtful, that the girl was likely an impostor got up by interested parties. Note the interested party in the gallery. A duke, if you please. And what was a duke doing in a Herefordshire inheritance, if not making mischief for his own amusement? that the paper was a forgery, that the old woman was a paid perjurer, or a senile one, and either way not to be believed. And then Cordelia's counsel, on her instruction, called his witnesses one by one, and the good, respectable face began to come apart. He called the parson, who was old now but living, and who had ridden 3 days to be there. The parson swore that he had witnessed Sir Edmund Harton's will in Sir Edmund's last week of life, in his own study, and had read it over. It left everything to the daughter and affirmed the marriage. And he had wondered for 16 years why it was never produced, and had been afraid, God forgive him, to ask. He called the parson's wife, who had witnessed it too, and who described the very room, and the very afternoon, and the fear on Sir Edmund's face. He called Lady Ursula, 81, and upright as a poker, who had danced at the wedding. She swore to the regularity of the marriage of which she had been a guest. She identified the running heart on the glove as the Harton badge beyond any doubt. And she looked at Horatio Harton across the courtroom, with a contempt so total that men near her drew back from it. He called the Duke of Chasewood, who swore to how the glove had come to him, and to the year of searching. He was asked, sneeringly, by the large barrister, what his interest in the matter was. He said, in the flat, cold voice he used when he was most in earnest, that his interest was that a wrong had been done to a good man's child 16 years ago, and had gone unrighted because the child was poor and the thief was comfortable, and that if a court found that strange in a peer of the realm, then the realm was in a worse way than he had feared. The gallery, which is always secretly on the side of the wronged, made a sound that the judge had to quell, and he called Cordelia herself. She had refused to be kept out of the box. Her counsel had advised against it, for a claimant who testifies gives the other side a claimant to attack, and the large barrister would be waiting. She had heard the advice and set it aside. She had spent 16 years being spoken for, spoken about, spoken over, a subject other people discussed in the third person, while she stood 3 feet away, holding a shawl. And she would not, at the 1 hour of her life that mattered, be spoken for again. She would speak. If the wrong was to be righted, it would be righted in her own voice, or not at all. She took the oath in a clear, steady voice, and she told them who she was. She told them of a house in Herefordshire, and a father who called her his heiress, and meant it. She told them of a strong box she had watched her father lock 100 times, and of the morning the lawyers opened it and found it empty, and of the 3 days her uncle had spent alone with it first. She told them of a closed carriage in the rain, and a plain new name pressed on a grieving child, and 16 years of being no one. She told it all plainly, without a tear, because she had done her weeping in private where it belonged, and would not spend it here for the entertainment of a gallery. Then the large barrister rose to break her, and found, as his colleague had found with the old nurse, that some things do not break. He was clever. He was practiced. He suggested that her memories were the inventions of a woman who had heard a convenient story and dressed herself in it. He suggested that a real heiress would have come forward years ago, and that the delay proved the fraud. Cordelia looked at him, and answered in the same steady voice that she had not come forward years ago for the same reason a man does not walk unarmed into a house full of thieves. She had had no proof, no money, no protector, and no name. A child of doubtful birth, who accused a respected gentleman of theft, would have been called mad or a liar and put quietly away. She had known it at 14, and known it at 20, and known it until the winter just passed, when for the first time a proof had been put into her hands. She had come forward the very week she had the means to be believed, and not 1 week before, because she was not a fool, and had never in her life been able to afford to be one. The barrister asked her, silkily, whether it was not true that she had secured the interest of a wealthy duke, and whether a woman might not say a great many things with a duke's fortune behind her. Cordelia said that it was perfectly true that she had the Duke of Chasewood's help, and that she was grateful for it, and that the barrister was welcome to make what he could of it. But she would remind the court, she said, that the Duke had not made her father's will, nor forged her father's hand, nor witnessed it before a parson 16 years ago, when he had never so much as heard her name. The paper was true before any duke touched it. Her birth was true before any duke was born. A rich friend could open a door. He could not build the house behind it. The house had been built by her father, in his own hand, in his last frightened week, and no cleverness in the world could unbuild it now. The barrister sat down for the second time that day, and the judge, who had presided over a great many hearings and grown hard to move, was looking at the young woman in the box, with an expression that had not been on his face when the day began. And last he called Dorcas Mercer. They carried her in, for she could no longer walk far, and set her in a chair, and she was so small and so old that the room went quiet at the sight of her. The large barrister rose to break her, as her uncle's man had promised she would be broken. He did not break her. He asked her, silkily, whether she could read. She said she could not. He asked her then how she could know that the paper she had kept was the great document she claimed, when she could not read a word of it. And Dorcas Mercer looked at him, and looked at the paper, and said in her thin, clear voice that carried to the back of the great cold room that she could not read her master's words. That was true. But her master had put the paper in her own 2 hands, with his own 2 hands, and had looked at her out of his dying face, and had said, Dorcas, keep this for the child, and do not give it my brother whatever he tells you. She had kept it 16 years, she said, sewn in her bag against this day. She did not need to read the words to know they were her master's last wish, for she had them by heart in a place deeper than reading. And she would swear to them before this court, and before God, and before Sir Edmund himself, whom she expected to be meeting shortly, and would look him in the eye when she did. The room was silent. The large barrister sat down. There are things a paid cleverness cannot touch, and one of them is an old woman with nothing left to lose, telling a truth she has carried for 16 years, and everyone in that court knew it, and none knew it better than Horatio Harton. Cordelia was watching her uncle when it broke in him. She had wondered whether she would feel triumph. She found she felt something else, something closer to grief, for she saw the exact moment when the settled, respectable face gave way, and the frightened man beneath it looked out. The younger brother, who had never made anything of himself, who had come to his dead brother's house with a hole in his soul the size of his whole failed life, and had filled it with a stolen estate, and had spent 16 years terrified every single day of precisely this room. She saw that he had not been happy in Harton Hall. She saw that a man may steal everything and gain nothing, may sit at the great table and taste ashes, may hold the deed to the hills, and never once sleep sound. He was not a monster. That was the terrible part. He was only a small, frightened man who had done a monstrous thing out of a small human terror, and had been paying for it in the only coin that matters, the coin of the sleepless night, for 16 years, and would go on paying now with everything else besides. The court found for Cordelia. It took longer than a sentence in the way of courts, with judgments and forms and appeals abandoned, but the shape of it was settled in that room on that day, and everyone in it knew it. The will was good. The marriage was proved. The daughter was who she said she was. Harton Hall and the estate and the name were restored to Cordelia Harton, and taken from the man who had held them 16 years by a lie. Horatio Harton did not go to prison. Cordelia would not press it. Her lawyers were astonished. The Duke said nothing, but looked at her in a way that was worth more than saying. And her uncle himself, when it was put to him that his brother's daughter had declined to see him tried for fraud, wept, which was more than his crime had ever made him do. He left Harton Hall a broken man, allowed a small competence by the niece he had robbed, which was more than he had allowed her. He lived out his years quietly in a small house in a far county, neither happy nor unhappy, only diminished, only haunted. He was a man who had at last got the poverty he had spent his life in terror of, and found it a lighter burden than the theft had been. His defeat was complete, and it was sad, as such defeats are, for there is no triumph clean enough to wash the pity out of watching a frightened creature lose the thing it wrecked itself to keep. She was restored to Harton Hall in the summer. She went back to it the way you go back to a country in a dream. The hills exactly where 16 years had kept them. The stone the same colour. The very smell of the place folding around her like a returned embrace. She walked through the rooms of her childhood as their mistress, and it was joy, and it was grief. The two were so wound together that she could not have said, weeping in her father's study with her hand on the empty strong box, which of them she wept for it was not all restored. That was the thing no court could mend. Her father was 16 years dead, and had not lived to see it, had died afraid, and gone into the ground, believing, perhaps, that his careful provision had failed, and his daughter was lost. Her mother was a portrait and a pair of gloves. The years themselves were gone, the childhood in the closed carriage, the growing up in cold houses under a plain name, the folded wants, and no judgment of any court could give a woman back the girl she had not been allowed to be. Cordelia had won. She had won completely. And she understood, standing in the restored house, that winning does not undo. It only stops the wrong from going on. The wrong that has already happened has happened, and will always have happened, and the best that even justice can do is to draw a line under it and say, no further. Not the past put right, only the future set free. And Dorcas did not see the summer. She lived to hear the judgment. That was the mercy in it. She was there in the great cold room, and she heard the court find for the child, and she gripped Cordelia's hand with her old strength and said, Sir Edmund, do you hear it? We kept it. We kept it. And she smiled. And she died 3 weeks after, in her sleep, in a good bed at last, in a house she knew to be her girl's. Cordelia buried her, not among the servants, but in the Harton plot, beside the family she had kept faith with a stone that gave her name in full. Dorcas Mercer, who kept faith. And Cordelia thought that of all the wrongs she had righted that year, the setting of that stone was the one she was proudest of. The Duke of Chasewood came to Harton Hall in the late summer, when the grief had had its first hard season, and the joy was beginning cautiously to have its own. He found her in the garden. He had asked her once to let him ask her again when she was standing on her own ground. And she was standing on it now. The mistress of Harton Hall, an heiress in her own name, restored and free, and needing no man's rescue, and no man's title, and no man's anything at all. Which was, they both understood, exactly the point. He had brought the glove. He had kept it a year and more, and he took it out now, the soft old kid with the running heart at the wrist, and he did not hold it out to her as a thing returned. He held it as a man holds the last card in a game he is not sure of. "You told me," he said, "to win first, and then let you tell me the thing you would not say from down there. You have won. You are as far from down there as a woman can stand. So I have come to hold you to it. Although I find, now I am here, that I am the one who is afraid, which is novel, and which I do not care for." Cordelia looked at the glove, and at the man, and at the hills of Harton behind him that were hers again. And she took, for the fourth and last and freest time, the decision that no court and no father and no fortune had made for her. It was hers alone to make, standing on her own ground, wanting nothing she had not already got, choosing purely because she chose. "When you found me," she said, "I told you I had never had the fortune to depend on a man. It was true. I had learned not to. It was the hardest thing I owned, that not depending, and I had paid for it, and I would not have given it up for anything less than everything." She took the glove from his hand. "You never once tried to take it from me. Every man I have ever known who had power over me used it. You had all the power in the world over a nobody in grey, and you spent it, every scrap, on giving me back the means to need you less. Do you understand what that is? It is the only kind of love I would ever have been able to accept, the kind that makes you free, and then, only then, asks." She drew the glove onto her hand. It fit, of course. It had always been hers. "Ask me, Augustus," she said. And he did, and she said yes, freely, standing on her own ground, an heiress and not a fugitive, a woman with her own name at last. She chose a man who had wanted her when she was nothing, and would have her now she was something, and had, in the whole strange year between, never once confused the two. They were married at Harton, in the little church where her parents had married, and where the parson who had witnessed her father's will rid the service. And Lady Ursula sat in the front pew, looking as though she had arranged the entire thing, which she maintained to her dying day she substantially had. Cordelia wore her mother's gloves, both of them, the fled one and its fellow, reunited at last. And she thought, going up the aisle to the man at the end of it, of the 10-year-old in the closed carriage, and of the woman in grey at the edge of the ballroom, and of everyone she had been made to be. She carried them all up the aisle with her, and gave them, with her hand, into keeping. There is a picture of them, from later years, that hangs at Harton Hall still, if the hall still stands. The Duke of Chasewood, greyer at the temples, his hard face gone, easy at last. The mistress of Harton beside him, and around them the children and the hills. And in a small frame beside it, kept always, a single glove, soft old kid with a running heart, worked at the wrist, the pair to the one she wore. And no one who does not know the story can ever say why a great house should keep, framed and honoured among its treasures, one old woman's glove. But Cordelia knew why. She had left it on a ballroom floor once, in flight, in fear, a fugitive from her own name, and a man had picked it up and followed it home across a year. Not to the hand, in the end, but to the whole lost woman the hand belonged to, and to the name, and to the truth. She had gone into that ball a secret in a grey gown, seen by no one, known by no one, called by a name that was not hers. She came out of the year that followed Cordelia Harton of Harton Hall, seen at last, and known at last, and called by everyone, living and dead, in open court and quiet church, by her own right name.